Video games. You know what they are. And since you're listening to this podcast, you probably grew up playing them like we did. So we're going to talk today about our experience with these time-wasting, friendship-enabling, friendship-ending, rage-inducing, emotional roller coasters of awesomeness on Generation S.
The future has already arrived.
Hey everyone, welcome to Generation S. It's a podcast about growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. I'm Dan Kemp today, my co-host, Lou Carnivale.
Good to be back, everybody.
Today we're talking about video games. Pretty straightforward, nothing too detailed. Video games were a big part of my life. Lou, I know they were a huge part of your life as well.
Yeah, they certainly were. Just same thing as we did when we did the wrestling show. I just grew up always with wrestling in my life and always grew up with video games in my life too.
Yeah, no, same here. And again, just like the pro wrestling podcast, this is not a podcast about pro wrestling, or not, sorry, it's not a podcast about video games. There are plenty of podcasts out there, again, that go into detail about the video game industry, video games, video game consoles. We're talking today about growing up with these systems and the games that we did in the 90s and early 2000s. So, I guess we can kind of kick things off. So, like, as far as your first exposure to video games, where did you what system did you start out with when you were growing up?
My first system that I had was the original Nintendo, the gray box version. I want to be specific about that. The one that looked kind of like a VCR at the time. I know I say that because they later came out with what they call the top loader. You actually put it on the top of the system. So that was my first system. Actually, when I got older and I was moving, I found an Atari, I want to say 5600, 5200. I'm not positive, but it was one of the original Atari systems, and it was my parents, and they got it as a wedding gift.
Oh, wow.
So
that is crazy.
Yeah, it explained to me why I was into video games, because they were into video games.
Yeah.
So that's two shows in a row that we're starting off with the topic, how did you get into it? Wrestling, my parents. Video games, my parents.
Yeah, well,
I'm seeing a pattern.
No, well, and it's funny because last time it was the opposite for me, where pro wrestling was really not something my parents did, or watched rather. But video games, yeah, no, I grew up. I had an original NES as well. I had the front loader, the VCR style, and I'm trying to think of what games we had like the original Super Mario Brothers Duck Hunt.
Everybody had that.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, I think it pretty much came with most of the bundled in. But I also had like Dr. Mario, Tetris. Honestly, I think back, I had a pretty big box full of games. I think at one point probably got up over 40 or 50 games just because, they were so cheap at garage sales after a while. Like my mom would just go to garage sales and pay $10 and get a bundle of like 20 games for us. And that was like our Christmas gifts one year or something. But yeah, no, and it's funny because again, like you said, with your parents, they were gamers. My parents, granted, they kind of stopped with the Nintendo, but they were NES gamers. And, I've gone back and asked them, I was like, why did we have a Nintendo? And they said, well, that was for your sister. My sister's 8 years older than me. And so that might be true. But I never remember my sister playing Nintendo. I remember watching my mom play Dr. Mario, which she was very good at. I sucked at Dr. Mario. Did you ever play Dr. Mario?
I don't think I did. I think the only time I ever played Dr. Mario, I believe it was like a bonus on one of the Game Boy Advance games, kind of like, an extra feature, so to speak, but like straight up Dr. Mario back in the day, I did not play that.
Okay. It was really hard. Like it was a puzzle game. It was basically a cross between, it was kind of like a Tetris ripoff where you had to basically match the colors to get rid of the bugs that were on the screen. But anyway, I digress. It was a fun game. It was a hard game, but she really enjoyed that. It's funny. I don't know if your mom did this. I don't know if this was a mom thing, but when your mom played the original Super Mario Brothers and she was running with Mario and she would try to jump over things, did she lift her arms up in the air to jump with
I
Mario?
knew you were going to say that, and I promise we didn't talk about this before we went on air. But yes, my mom did do that. Maybe that was a precursor to the Wii, but yes, my mom would move the controller up. She'd move it side to side. I did have the original Mario Brothers. Actually, my dad liked it more. My dad played very few video games, especially outside of sports games. But the original Mario Brothers, he did play, and I remember as a kid, do you remember the music would speed up? when the time was running out.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Very stressful.
Yes. So it freaked me out as a kid.
Oh, like you got neurotic over it.
It made me scared because the dungeon music was already kind of spooky.
Yeah.
But when it sped up, it was like this sense of urgency and danger, and I guess it did its job. It made me feel scared, but I remember my dad would get very excited when he was going down the tube with firepower to start the castle levels.
Yeah.
So his famous saying was, "I'm going down with firepower."
Going down with firepower. Yeah, we used to call it firepower too. Actually, now that I think about it, it was called a fire flower, but I didn't know that until years later. But when you got the fire flower and you could throw fireballs as Mario, I mean, we called it firepower. And then hold on. Okay, here we go. Another terminology I'm curious is if you called it this as well. The one-up mushroom, right? That's what we now call it. Did you call it a freebie back in the day?
I just called it a one-up.
You always called it a one-up. See, we called it a freebie in our house, so that was like, oh, it's a freebie. I don't know where that came from. It's probably something my dad said or whatever. But
now my dad would say it's not a freebie because I paid for the game.
Yeah, there you go. So my dad, he didn't really play Mario much, but he played sports games with me. And so, we're going to talk about other systems we own, but just on the Nintendo, there was one game in particular, it was called Little League Baseball. And it was honestly, in my opinion, the best baseball game that the Nintendo Entertainment System ever put out. The reason for that is because you could control the speed of your pitches. You can control the direction of your pitches. When you're in the outfield, you could control each fielder as it was getting, to field the ball, throw it to first base, whatever. And it was all with the directional pad. It was super easy to control. But it wasn't pro sports team, so I get why it probably didn't sell that well. But I mean, man, I tell you what, man, like literally, if you've never played it, the best baseball game on the original Nintendo.
I had RBI baseball, and I know we don't want to go too deep into this, but it was one of those unlicensed like black cartridge games.
Yep.
By Tengen. I believe they were a subsidiary of Atari or somebody like that. Don't quote me on that, but they were like official, unofficial games. It didn't have any of the MLB players or any of the teams. That's the one that I had for baseball, but I remember, I don't know if Little League Baseball was like this because I've never played it, but if you had to move one player, you moved the entire team.
Yeah, no, and this was great because basically wherever the ball was in the field, that player would like automatically be selected to go get it.
Was it just him though?
Well, and that's true. I think about it now. I think you might have moved multiple outfielders, and so basically you would move the one that you felt was closer in the direction to go, and that it would move both of them, but it was still very smooth. I actually remember the one you were talking about, RBI baseball. I had that later, and this was well after I had like a PlayStation even. My mom still picked up NES games for us and whatnot. And I remember playing it. It played like really a clunkier version of Little League Baseball.
Really? Okay.
So anyway, highly recommend that game. Again, this is not a video game, retrospective podcast, so we're not going to go too deep into it. I want to do two things. One, I want to kind of talk about every console we had up until, the early 2000s, basically when we graduated high school. What are all the consoles we had in our house? And then I want to go back and talk about, the early days and why we loved, playing on the earlier consoles and why some of those games have really kind of held up well. So I'll go ahead and I'll start. So I had an NES growing up. Actually had the top loader version later on when the original front loader crapped out. So we did have both. I remember going to the store with my mom to buy the top loader at like KB Toys. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever because it was like it worked so much better than the front loader. But anyway, so I had a Nintendo. I had a Sega Genesis. And then my next system was a PS1, and I remember we got that used when I was 12 years old, and oh my God, blew my mind. I had sort of heard of PlayStation. I'd never really played it before. I'd heard of Nintendo 64. My friend had a Nintendo 64 that I would play. But I mean, you think about it, that was 1998 or 99 that I got a PS1, and just, 1 or 2 years around the corner, you had the PS2. So
yeah, so that was kind of towards the end of the cycle.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, but it was great. There was so many games out for it already. So anyway, so after the PS1, we got I'm trying to think what I got next. It was either the PS2 or it was a Nintendo 64. They were right around the same time. No, you know what? No, I take it back. It was the N64 because I was still in junior high when we got that. And I remember we really didn't have any games for it. And so I remembered I would borrow my neighbor's copies of one WCW Revenge, which I'm sure
God.
we'll probably do a whole podcast on wrestling games because that's you and I have played wrestling games together for years. but the other one was Donkey Kong 64. And I think they let us keep it because, well, and it's funny because we actually couldn't play it at first because you needed that expansion pack. Do you remember that whole nonsense?
Yeah, I do. And that was the game that came with the pack, or the pack came with the game, was Donkey Kong 64.
Yes, and so we ended up having to borrow our neighbor's expansion pack to play it. And again, I don't think they ever asked for it back because I think they were done playing the N64 at that point. But anyway, so it was N64, and then I had PS2, which I think I ended up buying with my own money. So it was my PS2, which I was very excited about. It was the first thing. It was I think I'd saved up some birthday money to buy like a pre-owned PS2 from GameStop. And then we had an original Xbox. My brother did. He would play with me, obviously. It wasn't mine. That was his. And then right before I moved out of the house, I had bought an Xbox 360, which is probably the system you and I played the most together other than PS2, if I recall. Probably,
yes. I would say when we met, it was PS2, but then the 360...
Yeah.
Kind of took over in my opinion. It was two games that took over PlayStation for us going to Xbox. Was the SmackDown games were PlayStation exclusives. Eventually, they came on the 360, and you could do custom music, which was very big.
Oh yeah,
and then Gears of War.
Yep, Gears of War was a great. Oh, love that game. I know you've kept. Actually, it's funny. I introduced you to Gears of War, and you're the one who's continued playing the series. Where I kind of give up after like 2 or 3, I think.
That was the core of the trilogy. Well, obviously, it's a trilogy. It's 3, duh. But core storyline was 1, 2, and 3. Then after that, they've made 3 more, and actually, no, 4 more, I think. But a lot.
You've lost track. That's how unmemorable they are.
Some of them, yes. Some of them are unmemorable for sure.
Yeah. So, but anyway, those are the systems I grew up with in that order. What about you?
So the first one I had, like I said, was the original Nintendo, the box loader. I remember getting it. Oh, jeez, I just remember having it from the very beginning.
Same here. When I was born, like my earliest memories, it was in our living room.
Yep, it was in our TV room. I did get Super Nintendo relatively early to its launch, I believe. I remember playing it at a kiosk in Toys R Us. I remember when they had those. You could actually go into the stores and play the games and the systems.
I used it at Walmart all the time.
There you go. I remember Walmart had stuff for the Sega Genesis. You could plug in your memory card and download stuff.
Oh,
that was actually very smart.
Well, Sega didn't have memory cards.
The
Dreamcast?
Yeah,
Dreamcast. Okay, I never had a Dreamcast.
Really?
I never had a Dreamcast. I think I played it at a friend's house. But it was so expensive. Do you remember how that thing was super expensive? I'm very
surprised because when we went to college, you actually gave me a Dreamcast game.
I did because my friend gave it to me. I think my mom had gotten a bundle of games at a garage sale, and I never had a Dreamcast. But one of the games was a Dreamcast. So yeah, I gave you a Dreamcast game.
Do you remember what game it was? By chance?
Was it a fighting game?
It was. It was called Power Stone, which actually is a very good game.
It was like Super Smash Brothers, right? Kind of.
Yeah, a little bit.
So
I only played it once or twice.
Well, you're welcome.
Thank you. So Nintendo, then Super Nintendo.
Okay.
I remember I got that on a Christmas because my parents had that on like the old High 8 tapes, they were called. They used to record Christmas, so I remember getting that. I got a Sega Genesis very late in the cycle. I remember playing it at my cousin's house. She's older than me, so I want to say she is 8 years older than me, give or take. So it was the more adult system to have. I felt like Sega was more adult orientated than Super Nintendo. She had Sonic the Hedgehog, and it blew me away. So I did get it Sega late in the cycle. And then I want to say PS1 I got, then N64, and then probably a PS2. But the PS2, by me, was super hard to find. That was not on the level we're experiencing now, where people can't get their new Xboxes or PlayStations because of the chip shortage and shipping stuff and all this great stuff that's going on right now. But I do remember PS2 was very hard to find, and when I found it, it was at a KB, and they forced you to buy 2 games with it. Like, you couldn't just buy the system. You had to buy a bundle that KB made. Like, well, I'm buying the system, I'm probably going to buy a game anyway. It's really just forcing you to buy one more game.
Yeah.
I got Smuggler's Run, which was a very good game, and then a random NBA game.
Nice.
It was all right. Nothing to write home about. And then I got the GameCube, and that was the first one I had to pay for. That was
Oh my
first
God,
one.
dude! I had a GameCube. Yes, I got that before the 360 because I remember buying that for myself. Again, I was a junior in high school. Yes. Oh my God, I had a GameCube. I love the GameCube.
I didn't like it at the time, but now that I'm older, it's such a great system. I'm
holds
probably
up.
playing the GameCube more now as an adult than I was in high school.
See, and I don't have any of my old systems, so that's really, I mean, you held on. That's awesome.
I think I have all my systems except for the PlayStations because everything was backwards compatible at one point.
So yeah, no need to hold on to the older systems if the newer systems can play the older games.
Exactly. So I do have I have everything I've mentioned. Yeah, I don't have the PlayStation 1 or 2 or 3. I did get an original Xbox late in the cycle, and then I did get a PS3, but never used. That was a bad
I remember
system.
when you got that, yeah, and you never play. I loved my PS3, but you never played yours.
I never used it. There was nothing out that I really liked. I think because we had moved over to the 360 because of the wrestling with the custom music.
Yep.
And it sounds silly, but if you're a wrestling fan that has played those games and you know you can put in the custom music for your custom guys, you will understand. You understand and know why we went to the 360 because you can do that.
Well, and yeah, I mean, because we always created our own wrestlers and our own fake wrestling promotions, and as authentic as we could make it, we would, right? So we would, do the music. Eventually you could make your own fake championship belts in the game. So we did that. You could add logos. I mean, and we still play wrestling games to this day. In fact, we both got the new one. You convinced me because I haven't bought a new wrestling game in probably almost 5 years, and you convinced me. Said you should get this game. I said, all right, fine, I'll get it, and having a good time with it. It's fun.
It is fun. And, the amount of creation that you have to put into the game is a bit much now, and we're older. Right. We don't have that much time, but the core gameplay is good, and I was about the same. It's been about 5 years.
Yeah.
And I do that with all the sports games. I don't get them every year. Like, there are some diehards that get Madden or just any other sports games. I get a Madden game once a generation console, and then the NHL I probably go every other year. Those are the only ones I really play. And then I guess that would be it. The last one, if we're going to leave off in the mid-2000s, would be the 360 would be the last one. Funny thing, though, do you remember the 360 actually still came with a memory card?
I do, yeah. And then it was like all the rage to have a hard drive to put on it because I had the memory card when I first got it. And then eventually, I bought a hard drive. And it blew my mind how much more you could store in a hard drive versus a memory card.
Yep. And also your controllers weren't wireless yet. You still had a wired controller. So
yep.
In retrospect, you spent like another $100 to get the hard drive and then probably like another $60 to get the wireless controller. So it's almost $200 just to have like a fully functioning, finalized version of a 360.
Which is now, I mean, again, that stuff is all standard these days. But yeah, back then, I mean, and this was in, again, the mid-2000s. That was like revolutionary. And I think Xbox was the first one to implement a hard drive, or like an external hard drive you could buy and plug into it, which was, again, that was huge. But anyway, let's go back. Let's wind the clocks back again to like the 80s and 90s. And, I think what was really cool about, those games was that it wasn't about the graphics. I mean, it kind of was because you're like, oh, this looks great. But like, how many games do we go back and still play that are older and like the graphics just, they don't hold up, right? I mean, you don't play them for the graphics. They were just so fun to play. It was simpler back then. You know what I mean?
It was. I think the only game I ever go back and I look at the graphics of and I go, these are very good, even for that time, and they still kind of hold up right now, to me, was some of the Super Nintendo games, because it was a different.
I was going to say the same thing. Yep.
Yeah.
Just, the graphics, again, it was what it was. It was 2D graphics, but it was, pixel art, but it was like the epitome of pixel art. Like Nintendo was you basically had, Super Nintendo could fly, or what is the phrase? Nintendo walked so that Super Nintendo could fly, right? They knew what they were doing by the time the Super Nintendo came out. They really pushed the limits of the system. And, with that, we got some games that, again, I agree. I think they still look beautiful. You're not looking at like Call of Duty graphics on a Super Nintendo. But again, that's not what made them fun. It wasn't the graphics necessarily. They were just, the good ones. There were a lot of bad games, but the good ones were just fun to play.
Exactly. And also, I think, like you said, Nintendo Entertainment System, the original one had a walk so Super Nintendo could run. The original Nintendo, I felt like, still had those arcadey type games where they were a little cheap, a little hard, going for the highest score, not so much like beating a game, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yep. No, I do. And that's, yeah. And they would have like even like the arcade front screen where you would theoretically, that's where you would put your quarter in. It was like the menu screen where you push start, that's all, over from the arcade days. And, yeah, I mean, I guess by the time you got to Super Nintendo, probably more so like the N64, PlayStation, like you never really had to worry about like high scores anymore unless it was like a real part of the game. Like I know like Street Fighter, for example, held onto the scoring system well into when it was a console game pretty much exclusively. Because I mean, it was part of it. Like people would, there would be the tournaments for fighting games where, I mean, part of it was just, winning the actual rounds, but the other part was like, what kind of score could you get? Well, who had the highest score? That was almost like a badge of honor, even, later long after, arcade scores really didn't matter anymore on the console.
Yeah. And the only reason they, like you said, they mattered was for bragging rights at the arcade. But as the systems got better at home, the arcade started to die a little bit.
Yep.
More and more. I see arcade cabinets every now and then, but they're more for the novelty than being something new. I don't think anything gets released anymore that's new. The newest arcade cabinet I ever saw was probably 7-8 years ago. I saw a Street Fighter 4 arcade cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
And the poor kid had no idea what was going on when I walked up to him, put the quarter in, and he looked at me, and I'm like, this poor kid has no idea what's going on.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and I didn't go easy on him either. I beat him.
You know what, man? No, he's got to earn that victory. Like, no, I do the same thing with my kids. So I'm teaching my son to play chess. He's 7 years old. It's time for him to learn how to play chess. And I haven't done this yet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a $100 bill and I'm going to put it on the table. And every time I play him, I'm going to tell him, when you beat me, I will give you this $100 bill. And I'm going to proceed to kick his ass for however many years it takes for him to actually beat me in a game of chess. And by then he will have earned that $100 bill.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Can you teach me how to play chess also for $100?
I
actually don't know how to play chess.
I will teach you how to play chess. Absolutely. All right. So so the next thing I want to talk about here is we've touched on some of our earlier memories of playing games. What I really want to talk about now is, there's really two ways to play a video game. You can play by yourself or you can play with a friend, and that friend could be next to you on a couch like we used to do. It could be online like we do now because we live 1,000 miles away from each other. So I want to talk about like our favorite games to solo, to play by yourself. And then I want to talk about our favorite games to play with friends, either locally or online. Again, we're talking 90s and 2000s. So it was basically all local at that point. So, why don't you go first, man? Your top 3 games that you could play alone that you were now, but back then, like you loved to just go through and play by yourself.
So my favorite games by myself, because I was an only child, so I had to entertain myself a lot of time by myself. The Mario Brother games, mostly number 2, because I didn't have number 3 growing up. I think that was a very hard game to come by when it actually came out. I want to say like 90, 91.
Very popular. Oh, yeah.
Yep. So I had Mario Brothers. Number 2 was actually the favorite of our household. I know a lot of people don't like it. It wasn't the original number 2. We're not going to go too deep into details, but if you don't know that, it's worth a quick Google. Type in Super Mario Brothers 2, and you'll read the whole story about that.
Oh, it's a fun game. But I mean, I think you'll agree. It's not a Mario game. I mean, it's fun, but it doesn't play like, now granted, later on they would incorporate elements from that game into future like mainline Mario games, but back then, like you and I, come on, it was fun, but it didn't feel like a Mario game anymore. Like,
but at the time, it was all you knew. It was the second game.
And that's true. Yeah, because there was a an actual Mario 2 over in Japan that was basically Mario 1 on steroids. Like it was a hard game.
Hard. It was very hard. I played it on Super Nintendo. It was very hard.
They called it Lost Levels on Super Nintendo, and oh my god, like ridiculous, like to the point where it wasn't fun. You know what I mean? Like I was never good enough at Mario back then to where I needed to feel like it was just going to assault me every time I jumped over a platform. Like, not fun. So I definitely appreciate the fact that they brought over this other game that they reskinned as a Mario game. It was called, I think, Doki Doki Panic in Japan. And so they made this really fun game. because I liked it too. I did like it. I guess it's more looking back, like it wasn't a Mario game in the traditional sense, but man, it was fun.
Yeah, but at the time we didn't know. And even when Mario
Right.
3 came out, you still didn't really know.
Right.
So I would say Mario 2, and then my favorite Mario game of all time is Mario on Super Nintendo, Super Mario
World. Yep.
Love it. Love it.
I feel like we could probably do a whole podcast on that game alone. That game was incredible. And it's funny because I didn't play it, like I didn't own a Super Nintendo until I was almost in high school. Like I got one at a garage sale, but I always played it at friends' houses, and I would go visit my aunts and my cousins, and they always had a Super Nintendo. And so I would always play Super Mario World. Such a good game.
It was very good. And then sticking with the Super Nintendo, another one, I kind of touched on it a little bit when you said about graphics that don't really hold up. In my opinion, one game's graphics that do hold up because it was so different at the time was Donkey Kong Country on Super Nintendo.
Oh, I 100% agree. That game, again, never owned it growing up, played it at friends' houses. Super fun. And I always thought it was like cutting edge because it looked 3D. It had that 3D effect. Was it like claymation, would you say? I mean, how would you describe the art style of Donkey Kong Country?
I guess it was claymation. It looked like it. It was certainly different. And now that I'm talking out loud about it, did you ever play Clay Fighter back in the day?
I did play. It was a terrible game.
It was a terrible, but it was a good, bad game.
It was cool looking, and I think all of my friends talked about it, but then I actually sat down to play it, and this is after I'd already played because Clay Fighter is a fighting game.
Mm-hmm.
This was after, long after I'd played like the greats, like the Mortal Kombats and the Street Fighters, so when I go and play this, I'm like, this control is awful. Like, it looks really cool. So I think I did play it more than I care to admit just because it looked really cool.
Me too. But I think that was the same type of
that style of
animation.
not stop motion, but like almost like early CGI. I mean, it wasn't, obviously. It was because it was on a 2D system. But no, I agree. I think Donkey Kong Country was a beautiful game, very fun to play, and I agree. I think it holds up today very well.
And here's the thing: it was hard to find, to even rent. I remember going to Blockbuster for weeks and not being able to find Donkey Kong Country.
So just that popular.
It was that popular over by me. And the thing is, I got it. Eventually, I did own it. I played it. I beat it. I loved it. Number 2, I was stupid. I rented it, and the game was nearly beat, and I beat it. And my parents go, well, now you're not getting it. You already beat it. I'm like, oh, well, there goes that. So I never played number 2, and everybody says number 2 was amazing. I actually got it at a vintage game store in New York City maybe 5 years ago. Played it actually on the Super Nintendo, and it was fantastic. So all 3 Donkey Kong Country games, in my opinion, on Super Nintendo were great. And my last solo game is the original Crash Bandicoot on PS1.
Crash Bandicoot. Yes, I never played I think I played it once on a demo disc, and that's another topic.
Oh,
for another
wow,
day,
I remember those.
Demo discs
yes.
from Pizza Hut. I used to get demo discs from Pizza Hut.
Wait, from Pizza Hut? I never knew those existed.
Yeah. Oh, that's where I got Crash Bandicoot. So anyway, great game. I do have like the remastered version on my Nintendo Switch, and it's a lot of fun. But I didn't have it growing up, so I don't have that nostalgia for it. But it's one of those that they remade it, so obviously it was very popular back in the day. I mean, what did you like about Crash though? Because I mean, it's a pretty straightforward game. You run from the back of the screen to the front of the screen and get to the end of the level. Like, what did you love about it?
Here's the reason I like that so much is because I didn't like Mario 64. Oh, I know. I'm weird. I didn't like Mario 64. Mario's always been to me start on the left, jump, end on the right. So I didn't like Mario 64. So I felt like Crash Bandicoot was what I wanted Mario to be instead of in like the 3D realm, that 2.5 kind of start left, go right, or go north, south. I just like the atmosphere. I like that it was different. Like, I remember the boulders, like it was like a level that reminded me of Indiana Jones with the rock coming at you and you're running towards the screen. So I felt like it was kind of innovative, but not too much. I just liked it. And also, he didn't talk. That was another thing. There was a lot of games on PlayStation like Gex and other things like that where they took advantage of being on a CD and they can do voices, and it was just too much, too often. I just wanted to play a game.
It usually sounded like crap, though. It never sounded good because even though they had like the digital capabilities, whatever they used to record the actual voiceovers for, they always sounded really bad. Maybe not always, but there were a lot of games where I'm like, this just sounds awful. Like, it just doesn't sound good. Like, the audio is muffled. It just, yeah. So I agree. I think, you know, and I think it's probably what helped it stand the test of time is that it kind of kept it simple. It didn't go too deep into, you know, trying to have like high res, quote unquote, high res textures for walls and floor, like to the point where like you look at some PlayStation 1 games and there's no, dude, they're ugly. I mean, you can't deny that most PlayStation 1 games look like total garbage today.
I agree. I think the N64 PS1 games, I have very fond memories of both of those systems, but those games look horrible. I think Super Nintendo and GameCube games have aged better than the PS1 and the N64. Absolutely.
Well, and so, well, and you know, obviously with the former, the Super Nintendo and even Nintendo is because it's 2D limitations, but they were, I mean, it still, I mean, they figured out the secret formula to make it work. And so they were just fun games. But I mean, same thing with me though. Like, I'll look back at like fond memories of games. There's so few Nintendo 64 games I would go back and actually play and have fun playing. I was actually just listening to another video game podcast today and they were talking about GoldenEye and they had a really good point. Like back in the day, did you ever play GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64?
I certainly did. Yes.
Okay.
When we were gonna, you know, I know we're gonna keep talking about other games from the eras, but yeah,
yes.
that's how I was going to bring that up later.
Let's put a pin in that then. Yeah, we'll talk because we're going to talk about games we play with friends. I want to go through some of mine that I would play by myself.
Yes, absolutely.
And then we can move on.
I have one idea. I have one idea. Can I take a guess?
For what? For solo games?
For solo games.
Yeah.
Is Punch-Out.
Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, yes. Well,
wait, it got to be official, not just Punch-Out.
Well, that's the one I had. I had Mike Tyson's Punch-Out growing up. I know they re-released it after Mike Tyson's contract ended, and they just didn't want to pay him any more money to keep him in the game. So whenever they made new copies of it, which is funny because that's not a thing that exists anymore, right? They don't come out with new versions of the same game with tweaked whatever. They'll run an update patch on a game, and you know, then it may change things about the game. But like back then, I mean, they re-released a new game and changed an entire character out. Like, I don't think any other video games back then did something like that.
I don't think so. I think there was also more to it. Either he got arrested or something like that.
I read that was coincidence.
Story.
I heard that it was coincidence that like his contract was up. They chose not to renew it and then he got arrested, but maybe not. I don't know. I'd have to go back and do like actual research on it, which I'm not about to do. But anyway, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, an amazing game. That's one that I grew up playing. I mean, literally could play it in my sleep at this point. Like, I played the heck out of that game. And one of my earliest memories is not just me playing, but my dad. Like I would ask him, like, Dad, can you beat Mike Tyson for me? You know, I'd always get to Mike Tyson. I can never beat him because he's hard as hell, man. He's one of the hardest, you know, video game bosses you could call him, you know, ever. And so my dad couldn't beat him though. He never could beat Mike Tyson. But he had a friend, Nick, and he would come over to our house to visit sometimes. And I would always make Uncle Nick go beat Mike Tyson for me so I could see, I mean, whatever it was at the end credits. Nothing memorable, obviously, but, that's another thing too, is beating games. You know, you have video games these days, but when was the last time like a modern game you said, oh, I beat that, and that was like a real accomplishment? Whereas back in the day, you beat a video game and that you were like, I mean, that's like points on the playground, right? If you beat, you know, Punch-Out or whatever, you know?
Well, I can answer that, but it's more of obviously the modern games. The only time I feel like really accomplished is not because of difficulty, but the time it takes.
Yeah.
That's the bigger factor now in my life, at least, is not the difficulty, because I'll figure it out some way or another, YouTube.
Yep.
But it's the time. So right when the pandemic happened, I was starting to play GTA. I don't even know what number we're up to.
5.
It is 5. Okay.
Yep.
I feel like 5's been out forever, but I played in
almost 10 years now.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I guess you could just keep doing DLC and whatnot. So I played it and I beat it and I went, wow, I beat a GTA game. That's pretty awesome.
That in and of itself, not the fact that it was hard, but like you beat a game that is known for basically being a pretty much endless game.
Yeah, and the same thing with Red Dead Redemption 2. I got that on PlayStation 4, and I beat that. I'm like, all right, I beat it. Great. And I was just, because of the time management. And I'll even go one better, because I had it on PS Now, which is the streaming service. You have a clock. It's like almost like taking a book out of the library. You only have it for maybe 90 days. So I had
you literally had to beat it within a certain amount of time.
I had to beat it, and I beat the main storyline, and I actually might buy the game because it was enjoyable to go back and do more, but I beat the main storyline. So yeah, now it's more about the time than anything else.
Nice.
Back in the day, it was difficult because you didn't have YouTube. You
Yeah.
didn't, only if you had the power. Nintendo power.
That's
Exactly.
right. Nintendo
or
Power
Game
magazine.
Pro or something, some sort of strategy game book, or
Or
actually
you
a
called the
strategy guide.
1-900 number or whatever it was to like actually pay money to have some geeky guy on the phone like walk you through levels.
Did you ever do that?
I didn't, but I read about it and I saw a documentary on it, so I knew it existed, but I never. Are you kidding? My parents wouldn't let me do that. Are you nuts? Come on, man.
No, I had never did that either. I did have strategy guide books, though. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, I think I had a couple. I mean, later. I remember I had some for like PS1 games, but I never had them for like early Nintendo games. I had a few issues of Nintendo Power. We never had a subscription, so I have no idea where they came from, but they definitely helped with like Mario 2. There was a whole section on like secret areas of Mario 2. But yeah, beating games, man, that was like the thing. Like you would tell your friends, like, I beat Ninja Gaiden. Now I never actually beat Ninja Gaiden. That was a really hard Nintendo game, but I beat, we'll talk more about this when I talk about games with, playing with friends and family, was like the Sonic games was, I beat the Sonic games, and they're not necessarily easy. They're not hard. But they're not easy either. See, I was never like one of those like expert gamers where like I could always beat the really, really hard games. But when I did beat a game, it was a sense of accomplishment, and like, but I would still go back and play it again. Like, I have games now that once I beat it, I'm like, I'm probably never going to play this again, but most of the games I had back, and maybe it's because I only had a few back then. Like, I had no other choice. I wasn't going out and buying a new game every month. Like, I had to play the games I had.
Yeah, it's very interesting you say that, because I was actually thinking that of a while ago, not too long ago, about when I was a kid, I had a lot less games, but I made them go longer.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's because we were kids and we had to rely on our parents or allowance or birthdays to get the games, or maybe was there not that many games out compared to what's out now and available?
I think there's probably more games out now, but there's also a lot of really bad games out now. And so you really only hear about the same, top 50 games at a time. And that's still a lot, obviously, but there's more games out now, I think, for sure. But don't get me wrong. There was a lot of games back in the day. I think I looked at like the Nintendo library, and I think it was like over 400 games or something huge. Like, you wouldn't even think of games you never heard of on the original Nintendo. And it could be because they were just, they were only released in Europe or Japan or stuff like that. But, they had a lot of games. So, but there was always that same top list of like, everyone played, Mario. Everybody played, I'd say everyone played Zelda. I didn't play Zelda growing up.
I had Zelda. I'm glad you brought it up. I had the original Zelda, and I remember getting it and it being a big deal because it cost $50.
Yeah.
Ooh,
oh, yeah.
$50 for a game. But
and it was
the thing
gold.
It was gold. But the thing is, it was too big for me at the time. Like, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. You figure you're 5-6 years old and you get the original Legend of Zelda with no instruction. Well, you had the instruction manual, but no help guide, no internet, no YouTube, no walkthrough guide. Like, here you go play.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I don't know what to do.
Like Mario, you go left to right, you jump on the flagpole, you win. It's simple. Zelda, because I did try to play it at friends' houses. I'm like, I have no idea what to do. I'm just walking around. I have no idea where to go because it's just a giant map. Looking back, I'm like, man, it did a lot of cool stuff and it was ahead of its time in a lot of ways. So like, as an adult, it probably still isn't as good as some later Zelda games, but it did some cool stuff, and I could still have fun playing it,
I would still have trouble with it, though.
Oh, it's not an easy game by any means. And
game.
When I did play it, either I beat it or I almost beat it one time, and it's because I had a strategy guide pulled up on my computer while I was playing it. So don't get me wrong, it's not an easy game and you need all the help you can get, but it's still fun. So anyway, just going back to the games that I love to play by myself, we talked about Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. We've talked before about Super Mario Brothers, and that's really any of them, as far as like the original, Nintendo, Super Nintendo. But again, I didn't have a Super Nintendo, so it was Mario 1, 2, and 3. I'd say probably 3 is the one I played the most because it had the most replay value. It was the longest. It was just, it was the pinnacle of Mario games on the regular Nintendo. But then I also played a lot of, and this is where we kind of differ, is I played a lot of what's called an RPG. So you think of like Final Fantasy, or I played this one game called Grandia all the time that I loved, and it was an RPG video game, and really they kind of stemmed from the early Dungeons and Dragons, where like you attack an enemy and you take off hit points and you have mana. And so it's all these different things that are like a tabletop, like a dice. D&D is very popular again now because of the show called Stranger Things, which you still need to watch. That's 2 podcast episodes. I've mentioned that to you now. They kind of repopularized D&D. And so, but anyway, D&D was kind of a precursor to a lot of these very popular RPG video games, like, again, Final Fantasy. The big one that, I first heard about was Final Fantasy VII on the PS1. And it was just this huge game. And again, it was such a unique style where you could like upgrade your characters and go on all these side quests, and you could, just basically level up your character to fight stronger enemies, and you had a real sense of accomplishment with that. So anyway, all that to say, when I was a little bit older, I got into RPGs as well. Grandia is probably my favorite game of all time, or at least top 10 for sure. So, but anyway,
I only played one RPG my entire life. Just
was
to
it
let
Super
you know.
Mario RPG?
No, I rented that, and I had no idea what was going on.
Oh, it's such a good game.
No idea. But again, at the time,
right, it wasn't a traditional Mario game.
Exactly. Yeah. Paper Mario on N64 was the only RPG I ever played.
Oh, I love that game.
Great game.
Love that game. So, okay. So that's games to play by yourself. Let's talk about games with friends. Again, I say, like, what do you prefer, by yourself or with friends? But honest, for me, it's equal. Like, I had fun playing by myself, but I have a lot of fun playing with friends. It just depends on the game.
I agree. There's some games that could be for solo that could have been played with friends, and friends vice versa. So I didn't mind. And most of the time, especially when I was younger, Nintendo, Super Nintendo era, it was just me and my parents. When I got to the N64, PS1, PS2 era,
yep,
more of the friends and stuff like that.
Yeah, so like I mean, again, I played on the regular. Well, that's the difference too, is you were an only child, whereas I had 2 brothers, and so I kind of had built-in friends to play. Now, granted, we would fight all the time about the video games, but at least would play them together. So, I talked before about playing the Sonic games. And so one of my favorite, and to this day, one of my favorite experiences of all time, is playing through Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles. They had this cool feature where you could actually plug 2 games into one cartridge. And you basically had this like super game where you had 2 games in one, and you would play through both of them back to back. And so my brother and I, Adam, we would literally, it probably took us 3 hours, but we would literally play through the entire game, start to finish, Sonic 3 and Knuckles together. And I could probably count on one hand how many times we beat it together, but oh my God, it was such a cool feeling to say, hey, we beat this game, we worked together, and 3 hours later, we won.
I did have that. I did have the cartridge where you put in Sonic 2 or Sonic 3 on top of the Sonic and Knuckles game.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It was really cool. Even to this day, if I go back and I think about that, that was really, really cool, really innovative to be able to take a game like Sonic 2 that came out probably a couple years before the Knuckles game came out and just put them together,
patch them
and
in,
have a new game. Yeah, that was awesome.
It was pretty amazing. And so, but again, one of the coolest experiences I ever had. A couple other ones here, so I'll kind of go through. So fighting games we've talked about. I played a lot of Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter. Honestly, the fighting game I probably played the most, and still probably my favorite franchise to this day for fighting games is, unless you count wrestling games, but I'm going to say they're separate, is Tekken, which is, I know that's a series that you never really got into, just because it was a PS1 fighting game that, eventually moved to like PS2, and I think it came out on 360 as well after that and whatnot.
I'm going to quote you and say I played it on a demo disc.
Okay, there you go.
But mine didn't come from a Pizza Hut, Domino's.
Where did it come from? I was Pizza Hut, yeah.
Pizza Hut. It came from, I guess, like a GamePro magazine or a PlayStation magazine. They actually gave you the demo disc with it.
Nice. Okay, well, there you go. So you had a demo of it, and was it just not your thing, or were you not into fighting? Well, because you still played like Street Fighter back then, probably like the 2D fighting games.
Yeah, I was into Street Fighter. I was not allowed to play Mortal Kombat. That was the only game I remember at any point in my life, my parents telling me, like, you can't play this game.
Like even on Super Nintendo when they didn't have blood?
I don't think they knew it didn't have blood, but I just knew I wasn't allowed to play. But the thing is, my parents were very in tune with the times, very down to earth. So if they said I wasn't able to play something, I didn't argue with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I was
You
playing
trusted him on
Street
it.
Fighter. Yeah, I was playing Street Fighter. I was playing like X-Men or Spider-Man or these other games that did have violence in it, or in wrestling, obviously. Some other games we're going to get to in a little bit. Also, the funny thing is, I bought my first Mortal Kombat game on my 30th birthday. And I actually just text my mom a photo of it. I go, am I old enough to play this now? She goes, I think so.
Which Mortal Kombat was it?
I think it was just, they called it just Mortal Kombat, and it was on the Xbox 360.
All right, so Mortal Kombat, fighting games. Another one that it looks like we both have this on the list, so we can talk about it as well, is the Mario Kart series. Now, there's been a lot of Mario Kart games. The first one was on the Super Nintendo. You had Mario Kart 64, you had Mario Kart Double Dash on the GameCube, then you had Mario Kart Wii, then you had Mario Kart 8, and then you had Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which is on the Switch. So of all of those games, the ones that we would have grown up with, as kids were like Mario Kart. I guess Super Mario Kart for the Super Nintendo, and then Mario Kart 64, and then Mario Kart Double Dash. I played all three of them. The first one I played was the Super Nintendo Mario Kart, and it was fun. I had a good time with it. But I tell you what, man, when I first played Mario Kart 64, I mean, mind blown. Like, you want to talk about like a game that like blew my freaking mind. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah, I think 3 games that blew me away when the N64 came out was Mario Kart 64, Wave Race, and Cruisin' USA.
Yes.
Those are the games that blew me away.
Oh my God. And so, I mean, I think to this day, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we sat down and played a round of Mario Kart 64. And I remember it because I remember we would play, like, my favorite course is like Donkey Kong's Jungle Parkway. Or what was it? Is that what it's called? DK Jungle Parkway or something like that?
I think so. I know what you're talking about.
It's my favorite course of all time. Any system, hands down, my absolute favorite Mario Kart course. I don't know why. There's nothing really special about it, but I just love it. I can do that course like with my eyes closed at this point. But Mario Kart 64, because you had the racing, you had like the versus racing where you just did one-on-one, which is not a feature in current Mario games, or Mario Kart games. It's not. No, you can't do just one-on-one racing. You have to do like a series. Like you have to do an entire, like with all the other racers. So they had a one-on-one versus, they had the Grand Prix, which was all the racers, and then they had battle mode, which was a thing in the original Super Mario Kart. It was, in the same basic concept. You had 3 balloons hanging up on you, and you gotta, you have to eliminate your opponent by throwing shit at them. Sorry, throwing stuff at them.
It's fine. They've all heard it before.
Yeah.
But see, you're showing how intense Mario Kart got.
Yes.
Nothing
my
says
friendships
screw
ended.
you. Like,
yes.
Wait, did you call it a blue shell or a spiky shell?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I probably called it blue shell.
I called it a spike shell.
Okay.
And for the longest time, everybody told me, no, it's a blue shell. I actually do play Mario Kart on the iPad. Mario Kart Dash, I think it's called. Either way, it's like the mobile game. But they call it a spiky shell. So I've been right all these years.
Interesting.
Everybody else has been wrong. But yes, it would get very, very intense. I remember playing Super Nintendo's version of Mario Kart with my mom. It was either very easy and you laughed at everybody, or it was very hard and you got hit with everything under the kitchen sink.
Yeah.
And then I
there
feel
was no
like
in between.
Yes, and I felt like every game got a little bit better and more balanced than, from extremely easy to extremely hard. There was that in the middle, so to speak.
Yeah. Now, have you played the new Mario Kart on the Switch? That's like the remake of the one from the Wii U, Mario Kart 8.
The last Mario Kart I played was the one on the Wii U, and I didn't like it because it had all those gliders and everything like that. So I'm kind of old school with my Mario Kart. Like, I just want Mario Kart, and I still play the N64 version here and there. Double Dash, I didn't like at first because Mario Kart 64 was just so amazing.
Yeah.
Like,
it was hard to top that, man.
Exactly. No matter what they came out with, it wasn't going to be as good. But looking back at it now, I tip my hat to them. Like, there's nothing else they could have done. And they did the double, exactly why it's called Double Dash, the two characters in the car, and you could spin them around. I remember playing that much later, like post-college, with my other friend, Dan. And we would be sitting there like laser focused because you had to balance out who do you want driving, who do you want throwing the weapons. And you had to I remember verbally saying 1, 2, 3, switch, 1, 2, 3, switch. it was an intense game.
There's more strategy to it.
It was, because you had to pick your characters. Do they complement each other? Do you want offense? Do you want defense? Do you want speed? So it actually is a very good game. I'm going to go on a limb here. My favorite Mario Kart game is actually the one on the Wii.
Mario Kart Wii is a very fun game.
And not because of the tilting stuff or anything like that. I don't even use that. I have the plastic controllers, but it's just, I feel like it's the perfect balance of the old games with no super bells and whistles of, the gliders or going underwater or anything crazy like that. But it has some of the old courses, some new courses. You can pick different levels from different cups, so to speak. An overabundance of characters. So I really like that one the best. But for nostalgia, man, nothing even comes close to nostalgia. Maybe, dare I say, for any other game, other than maybe the wrestling games, like we've said multiple times, because we're such big fans. But Mario Kart 64 is definitely like a top 3 nostalgia kick for me whenever 100%. I play it.
And you could pick it up and play it now, and you'll have a great time. It's not like a game like another one that I want you to talk about here, GoldenEye, where like unlike GoldenEye, in my opinion, Mario Kart has stood the test of time. I mean, God, it's almost been 30 years since that game came out.
That's disgusting.
I know,
disgusting.
Right? Because I mean, we're only 25, so I don't know how that's possible. But
yeah,
no, we're not. We are old. Well, no, we're not old. We're
vintage.
We're the age. We're vintage. There you go. We're retro.
We're classic rock.
We are classic rock. That is right. So anyway, my point being that the game holds up. You can have fun playing it now, and I think that's the true test, or not the true. That's the true sign of it's a classic game, like in every sense of the word, a classic.
I think you're exactly right, because you touched on graphics and gameplay, and Mario Kart 64. If you put that on an HD TV, whoa, man, it looks horrible.
Oh, it does.
You gotta get that little converter, from the AV cables to the HD, and it makes it a little bit smoother, but it looks rough.
Yeah.
But it's fun as all hell. Like, I went to a family function about a month ago, and we weren't playing PS4. We weren't playing PS5. We were playing Mario Kart 64.
Yep.
Like actual, no emulators, just actual, like, old school, that weird controller with the Z button on the bottom, the 3-handle things. It was weird, but we're still playing it.
It was the first controller to have a joystick.
Well, I guess, technically.
I mean, yeah. I mean, an analog joystick.
Yeah, although the Atari literally just was a joystick.
Yeah, no, this is the first one to have like a thumbstick, basically.
Yep.
Which is pretty big at the time, if you recall.
Absolutely. But I agree with what you said with GoldenEye also. It just didn't age well. But at the time, it was amazing.
Oh, my God.
Absolutely amazing.
And again, I was just listening to a podcast today about it, talking about like all the rules that everyone had playing GoldenEye. And I'm going to tell you the rules we had. I guarantee you probably had those rules too. It was like 1, no odd job.
I don't remember that. What was up with
You don't remember Odd Job? So Odd Job he was one of the characters you could unlock, but he was really short, so you could never hit him.
Oh,
like with the gun,
yes.
You
was that the Asian guy with the hat?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Got it.
That was the Asian guy, Lou, with the hat. Yes. So no Odd Job. You were not allowed to use Odd Job. And then we would always do fun rules. Like we would do slappers only, where you had to like literally judo chop the person to death.
I remember that. And rockets only were fun.
And then, did you ever yell at your friends for like screen looking? Like, no looking at my screen?
Absolutely. And then big head mode.
Paintball mode?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. That too.
So,
throwing knives was another one.
Oh, yeah. That was really hard.
And then when you miss, because when you miss, you had to run and try to get the ones that you missed.
Well, you could go, that's the thing, is you can go get your ammo back, which was always kind of cool. And again,
I'm laughing at the one where you're just slapping each other.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't thought about that, and literally probably since I played it, have not thought about playing with other friends and you're just slapping each other.
Well, and you know what? That's the idea of this. I mean, I hate to say it, that's the idea of this podcast, is that you're remembering things that you totally forgot about. But again, it's one of those where we're so nostalgic. We can talk about all the fun we have. But when was the last time you actually tried booting up GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64 and actually playing it?
Long time. I think probably when I moved, I just wanted to see what games worked.
Yeah.
And I booted it up and then just, didn't have an urge to play it. Maybe because it was by myself, and that would probably be something I want to play with somebody else. But as I'm saying it out loud, I am realizing they remade GoldenEye on the Wii. and I did get it, and I did play it, and I liked it.
So I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I have played GoldenEye at least one more time in the last 10 years, and it sucks. It does not hold up. Going back to using one analog stick to move your character all around. I mean, we're kind of spoiled. Not that I'm not a huge fan of shooter games now. I'm not good at them, so I don't really play them. But the whole idea of having the twin stick shooting, where you move with one and then you strafe left and right with the other. We're kind of spoiled with those, because back in the day, you only had one joystick to move around, and that's really clunky to try to aim your weapon. So no, GoldenEye does not hold up, and it's a real shame, because that was one that was such a big deal back in the day. And for what it was, and for the time it was pretty revolutionary. And again, I think we owe a lot of what we have now in these multiplayer shooting games really to just, how popular GoldenEye was on the Nintendo 64.
I think it was Doom and GoldenEye that made the shooting genre what it is today.
100% agree. Doom is now, and I never had Doom growing up because I didn't really have a PC, but
either did I. But I would suggest, if you get your hands on the GoldenEye for the Wii, if you're able to play it on the Wii, I would definitely check it out.
Okay. All right. Good to know. All right, man. Well, listen, I think that's really the only other thing is, I want to talk about how video games, growing up with them impacted our life today. Yeah, and we've kind of touched on it throughout the episode, so there's not much else to say. I mean, you and I both still play video games a lot. Not as much as I used to, just because I've got other responsibilities. I've got a wife, I've got kids, I've got a job, I've got all these things. But now, I get to play video games with my kids. And so Eli, my youngest, he just turned 4, actually. He loves fighting games. And so I am so happy about this, because again, I love fighting games, but we spoiled the crap out of our kids. So for Christmas one year, we got him an arcade game. Like, those arcade game systems you can get in Walmart from Arcade 1UP. That's the brand.
Yes, I have one of those still in the box.
Oh, you do? Which one?
I believe it is Centipede. I got it. I think it was mismarked online. I got it for like $50. I don't have any space for it currently where I am, but for $50, I'm like, I'll just buy it and hold on to it, and eventually I have someplace to put it one day.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So anyway, we got him the Marvel superheroes cabinet, so he can play Marvel superheroes, X-Men, and then he plays the Punisher on there, which is really messed up because it's actually a very violent game. But my wife's cool with it. I'm not going to argue it. And then we also have Street Fighter, the arcade system, on there as well. And so it's it's really cool just watching him play. Now, he doesn't like to play with me. He likes me to watch him play fighting games. Like, he's not yet ready to compete. But you know what? The fact that he realizes he still needs to practice, mad props to him there. So Eli loves fighting games. Carl, on the other hand, he's very, I'll put it this way. He loves math. He's a very math oriented, but also very creative. And so some of his favorite games are actually one of the ones that I play a lot on the Nintendo Switch. It's Super Mario Maker. He loves building out levels and then having me play through his levels. Another one I have is called Game Builder Garage, which is a game that's literally about coding video games, and he loves it. He loves coding on his iPad, so he's really into those kind of creative type games. And then he'll watch me play all kinds of games. He's watched me play through all the Mario games, Luigi's Mansion. He's watched me play through that. There's a few others. So he likes watching me play different types of games, but as far as ones that he'll sit down and play, he really likes the creative, strategic type games. So anyway, that's really how it's impacted my life. Because of my love of video games, my kids now have that same love, and to a degree, within reason, we let them play video games. We don't let them go overboard with it, because I think there is there should be boundaries with it. But I love the fact that they're going to be old enough soon here to go back and play some of these games that I played growing up, and hopefully they feel the same way that I did, when I played them for the first time, 25, 30 years ago.
I hear you with that. My neighbor here, he's a couple years older than us, and his son is about 5 or 6 years old, so he's starting to get into the games. And I had a Street Fighter shirt on one day, and I was outside, and he goes, they call me Mr. Lou, which is kind of funny. Mr. Lou, I like that game. It's old, though. I'm like, oh, jeez. So I'm like, okay, yes, it is old. He's calling Street Fighter 2 old, which is calling me old, but he was telling me he likes the older games because they're easier for him to understand and to play, which I totally get. For me, the impact it's had on me, I mean, nothing out of the ordinary. You know, your situation is different because you have kids and you have your next generation and you're able to spend time with them. I think the first game that allowed me to think outside of the box in terms of ideas and storytelling and using my imagination, believe it or not, was Twisted Metal. I don't know why, but I was enthralled with it. I actually, like in high school, or maybe it was middle school, either way, had to do a project. You had to write a TV script, like an outline. And my idea was Twisted Metal. And I don't know if you know this, they're actually making a Twisted Metal TV show.
I did hear about that.
On Peacock. Yeah, the guy that plays Falcon from Marvel Cinematic Universe, Anthony Mackie, I think is his name.
Yep.
He's going to be the main character. So I just kind of find it funny that I had this idea in my mind as a kid, just like, oh, it'd be really cool to make a Twisted Metal TV show, and here they are making it now. I think the creative bug came from that, and then it went into wrestling, creating the characters and just using your imagination. As an only child, you have to use your imagination a lot. So yeah, nothing too crazy right now. It's just games when I have the chance. Like I said before, nothing too major. No Skyrim, or think what people playing now is Elden Ring. It's kind of like Skyrim. I don't have time for that stuff. It looks cool. I would love to, but I don't. The online gameplay is slowed down because everybody's got responsibilities now. You know, Gears of War was very big online. Star Wars Battlefront was very big online. I will say that online gaming did help during the pandemic.
Yeah,
obviously.
I agree.
Because we were all home doing some stuff. I even think you jumped on with a group of my friends as well to play some Battlefront. It was just good so you could check in on everybody and wasn't just via text or a basic phone call. Sometimes people don't want to FaceTime because they look like, we're in a pandemic.
Yeah.
So doing that was good. It was a good outlet to talk to everybody and see what's going on. I think that had a huge effect. And I do recall that Sony, I can't speak for Nintendo because I really don't use their online services. I do know Microsoft and Sony gave out a lot of free stuff, free games, free online gameplay during it, which I thought was very good of them to do. Obviously, they're going to make money off of it, but it was still the right thing to do. But right now, I've been playing BioShock, which, again, it's getting a TV show, so that's why I picked it up. But not as much time as I used to, but that comes with age.
So, you know this, Lou. In a few weeks, I don't know when this podcast is going to get pushed out online, but it's the middle of May right now. So in a couple of weeks, I'm actually going to be heading up there to you to hang out with you for a few days. And we're going to be playing video games pretty much every day.
Yes, looking forward to it. I have the movie room also, so nothing says a good time like Pixels on a giant screen. It'll be great.
Oh my God. Yeah. And we're just going to sit there in front of the TV and I don't know about you, man. Every time I play video games with you or just with friends in general, I'm always taken back to playing them when I was 6 years old, and that's a good feeling. It really is. They say nostalgia. I think I said this last time. Nostalgia is like the happiest form of sadness because you look back and you can't get that time back. But at the same time, it's happy memories. And so, thanks video games. You made me happy.
And you did rot my brain.
And he didn't. Yeah. So there, Ma. Like I still got my head full of brains. We're good, man. I got no drain blamage.
Yeah. I got nothing wrong with me. Ain't got nothing wrong with me.
There it is, man. All right. Well, listen, this is another one in the books. I had a lot of fun doing this, man.
Me too. Can't wait to do it in person.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned. We're going to try to put an episode out every other week if we can. Make sure you check out our Facebook page, Generation S Podcast. It's going to have the same logo for its picture as the artwork that you're seeing when you downloaded this one. And thank you for doing that, by the way. If you're a fan of the show, I know we're only a couple of episodes in, but if you are enjoying this and you want to hear more about what we experienced growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, and I'll have other guests down here as well to get some other perspectives. But make sure you subscribe, man. We're going to try to put this out every other week to start. And who knows, maybe that'll pick up too if we start really picking up steam with this thing. But this has been a lot of fun. I think it's, they talk about if you're going to do a podcast, do something that you can talk about. And I think, well, what can I talk about? I can talk about video games. I could talk about wrestling. I can talk about other things. I can talk about what it was like to be a kid. And there's so many people out there that grew up the same time that we did. And I think it's really cool to be able to just share those experiences that they might have had as well and have that connection. So thank you for doing this with me here today, Lou. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will see you next time.
All right. Have a good night, day, evening, wherever you are. Appreciate you listening.
Maybe we will be back.